In the work of art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, published in the early days of film, Walter Benjamin wrote, "The audience's identification with the actor is really an identification with the camera. Consequently, the audience takes the position of the camera." What did he mean by this? Well, let's consider what's literally happening when the audience views the actor on screen. The camera is basically providing the audience with a chosen point of view to observe the events of the film. This point of view isn't limited to angles and movements of the camera, but it also involves prosthetics, CGI, and most importantly, the subtle art of editing, suturing shots and takes together, adding music for emotional effect, etc. All the tiny details that go into creating the film as a whole that is presented to the audience as a point of view through which the story unfolds. The actor's presentation is to this end. They face the camera, they show their good side, and a close-up on the face of the actor means they don't need to act with any other part of the body for the scene to be successful. In sum, what matters for the actor is the generation of impressions from isolated and selected features and moments, instead of their performance being an embodied and continuous series of events. This is the difference for Benjamin between the embodied stage actor who performs in real time and the images of an actor after post-production. The process of film decontextualizes the actor from the real series of events in order to recontextualize them with the narrative of the film. Through the eyes of the camera, the audience, in a sense, still relates to the actor, but through the camera's understanding. The flattened and stitched together character is superimposed on the narrative as the necessary backdrop for the audience to even make sense of the actor. The relatable traits represented in the features of a character are understood only in relation to things external to that character. The character must be developed through the plot and the filming and editing process. It should be noted, in the original German, Benjamin used the word Apparat, which does refer to a camera, but it also invokes a machine in a general sense. It refers to political machines, for instance. Apparat bears an obvious etymological tie to the English word apparatus. Its root is the Latin word apparatus, which means to prepare. This makes sense in context of the aphorism from which the quote was pulled. The aphorism refers to the film as a structural whole, formed by separate processes of the camera machine, its techniques, and its editing process. The translation took the word camera as a stand-in for the film apparatus, but this is how the quote should be understood. Not just a personification of the camera, but as an entire structure of various processes or preparations which condition how the audience sees, and therefore is what gets related to. The identification with the camera is, in other words, an identification with the film process. For the film process is present in the image, not immediately present, but virtually. The filming process mediates the relationship between an audience group and an actor group. It is a quasi-opposition where the actor is flattened onto an image by the camera for the public, and the public audience evaluates or identifies with the flattened image as if it were a person. These two groups, actor and audience, are separate yet brought close by the film process. The actor necessitates an audience to act for, and the audience only exists in observation of some actor. Each group is aware of the other, yet their ability to relate to the other or to themselves is conditioned by the film medium in an asymmetrical fashion. The question to be answered is how Benjamin's analysis applies today. This brings an inspection of the still new internet medium, and especially social media as it increasingly eclipses traditional social life. The point of this application should help us better understand how the medium affects sociality and behavior. With Benjamin, we saw that the audience identifies with the context or infrastructure used to evaluate or understand the actor on screen. For film, the audience identified with the camera and its perspective of the flat actor in the context of the film. Now, The audience on social media identifies with the internet medium's representation of a person, thing, event, etc. in context of the internet medium. There's no pre-planned plot providing the background needed in order for the audience to identify with the image. All media on the internet emerges in real time. Context for anything on the internet medium is given by the internet medium itself. The so-called audience gives the context that we identify with while evaluating the flattened actor image. This is a self-referential process where the internet audience provides the infrastructure necessary for the singular actor or piece of media to be related to. The rendered media is always understood in the context or the common sense of internet groups, themes, the trends, the common opinions, etc. On the internet, the actor implies the audience in a different way than film. The reproduction of any media and its actor is only by the audience's demand. What I mean by this is the literal reproduction of media on people's computers or phones is due to engagement. In turn, the audience envelops the actor-audience distinction by acting via engagement with media. The engagement not only is the condition that determines how popular something might be, but it also appears shoulder to shoulder with the original media for further audiences. This explains why the introduction of everything is always digested by the audience in self-referential terms. Once the initial media appears through the medium, internet audience groups form out of their reception and reactions. Then, further audience groups may form evaluating particular reactions. So reactions of reactions, or the relevance of reacting at all, so on and so forth. For example, a music video may appear garnering mass internet attention or a large audience group, but also reaction videos, tier lists, discussion communities, and other supplementary content gets produced for further audiences. The actor-audience dynamic gets played out in each step through the assembly of an audience group who evaluates the media, but at the same time, is subject to evaluation by later audiences. Each piece of media, from image to text, sound, etc., play the dual role of actor and audience. Audience in proximity to some other media which gives it context, and actor in how it causes further audiences to form. This applies all the way down to the act of viewing media, since one's viewing history is recorded, schematized, and, for example, sold to advertisers. For Benjamin, the camera was the wedge that distinguished the two groups. But with the internet, it is as if the camera is pointed at the initial actor, but also any ephemeral audience's evaluation of such a thing for further audiences. Everything on the internet is presented on the same platter, the same feed or timeline. The actor-audience distinction is more of a process of exchange on the internet, one which conditions how social interactions take place. As a tangent, you can already see how the relevance of any original is undercut by this movement. What is considered interesting on the internet is measured in terms of its affects rather than its ingenuity or originality. To bring this to a point, we arrive at a description of some sort of group formation process. It matters very little what is produced or posted on the internet. What does matter is the engagement, or the ephemeral formation of an audience that acts just by fact of engaging with media. These ephemeral groups continuously reform in proportion to current engagement. As the audience continuously orbits the same thing on the internet, they develop a kind of meta-language or motifs. The most obvious example of a motif are memes, where reproducing the meme functions as this in-group speak. And the person reproducing a meme motif is simultaneously the actor and the audience, both of the group and for the group they are participating in. The exact same process takes place in music communities, where the motif could be a song, it could be an artist, often presented with just a soundbite, an image, or a reference, and it still bears an in-group significance in its use. The motif is the motor of the group formation. As far as it spurs engagement is as long as the group lasts. Another general example of this process is the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, consisting of someone pouring ice water on their head to raise awareness for the disease. The recorded act of pouring ice water is the motif that the group forms around. The recording bears an actor-audience double implication in that the person must have witnessed and related to the trend, at least at the gregarious level, to reproduce it, and that it is for the purpose of further audiences who assemble only by active engagement. This appears all at once in the recording. It is obvious that the individual never identified with the person they watched doing it, nor any original actor, but rather they identify with the group, its message and its gregarious symbolic content all packaged into the image. Further, any person takes part of the in-group through their reproduction of the group for further audiences. In other words, they act by engaging, either through text, likes, shares, retweets, etc. The mode of engagement doesn't matter. They all have the same effect to varying degrees. To summarize what I've said so far, on the internet, the actor-audience distinction has collapsed into one, but it still informs how we relate to everything that appears on the internet. Everything appears as if it's on a web or a scalar field where it's always situated in an environment that gives it context. It is given that media on the internet functions as an actor since it's put forth to be seen, yet media also functions as an audience because it always appears in terms of something else. Watching implies acting. Acting implies having watched. The way acting implies having watched is best exemplified in the motif. The motif appears in a particular post on the internet, but its meaning and its reality is only in its resonance with other posts on the internet. In a word, it is intersubjective. The sociality embedded here is a game of group participation, which is been called in-group or audience groups. These groups, they assemble, split, dissolve. This never happens suddenly, but only in gradients and thresholds. A motif may repeat similarly, or it could drift to a different environment where it could have a radically different meaning. Any motif can split and give rise to offspring which do not resemble it. Any motif can become irrelevant and fall out of use. Social media's invention isn't tangible. It is instead this intersubjective phenomenon, some kind of asynchronous group dynamics. In-group formations are not constrained to spatial or temporal conditions, but emerge spontaneously out of encounters. What emerges is the resonance or the motif whose gravitational pull is the identity of the group. And finally, one relates or identifies on the internet by performing the dual actor-audience role, reproducing the group for further audiences. Let's compare this approach to something like the idea of a parasocial relationship. Horton and Wall introduce this idea to describe how the audience attempts to identify with a TV persona on these personality programs or other non-fiction media where the actor isn't playing a role except for what they call a cultivated personality. It is an unvarying characteristic of these personality programs that the greatest pains are taken by the persona to create an illusion of intimacy. We call it an illusion because the relationship between the persona and any member of his audience is inevitably one-sided, and reciprocity between the two can only be suggested. Like Benjamin, Horton and Wall see that the audience is unable to identify with the actor. However, Horton and Wall stop here, at illusion, instead of questioning the real social forces at work which produce the illusion. This isn't to downplay the concept and what it's good at explaining, but rather to show that there's a different kind of sociality at work under this illusory one. Applying the same logic from before, the audience of these personality programs identify or relate to the infrastructure that gives rise to the content. Horton and Wall had television in mind, so the infrastructure is the same as with Benjamin. The apparatus of production, the camera, the editing, directing, marketing, all these respective norms and trends as they converge into the image that the audience sees. For the internet, the infrastructure is the audience groups and their motifs. I don't mean to say that the audience groups is what makes something like a vlog, for instance, physically possible. Obviously, modems, website domains, and the physical events that take place are more relevant to the possibility of the video getting uploaded. But however, I do mean to say that the conditions for the vlog to produce an audience group, and hence this illusion of intimacy, is to the extent that the vlog or media exhibits motifs that structure audience groups, whether the actor making the vlog knows it or not. Even in the case where the actor attributes characteristics to their fans to develop some parasocial intimacy, especially with these influencers, these characteristics simply become the gregarious motifs of the group. So far as the individual fan thinks they are in relation to the actor, they are really in relation to the group. It is through the identification with the group via the gregarious characteristics that they feel some connection to the actor, which would be called an illusory one if we are thinking with the parasocial. But is it really an illusion? Are they tricking themselves, or are they being tricked? Maybe celebrity fandoms have more in common with sports fandoms or nationalisms than they do with pen pals. The former two contain group phenomena involving gregarious attributes that the group members more or less submit themselves to, in terms of national identity, something that you take on to take part of the group. And on the other hand, this non-illusory pen pal relationship is just one of a different kind. It's one less gregarious and more rich with personal significance and singularities. The internet medium presents a new sociality, separating it from anything before, but to interpret absence of sociality from what is so far only a difference is reactionary and naive. Dismissive critiques of internet dynamics stretching from touch grass to the condemnation of service-level language policing, virtue signaling, and moralizations, and so on, have all had too little of an effect on the landscape of the internet. Perhaps because those that do these types of critiques just cause another in-group formation characterized by an opposition, which is to say that they're more about the person who does the critique and how they don't take part of these groups who take internet phenomena too seriously. And therefore, the audience groups that form around these types of critiques use it as a motif that appears in the comments and replies for further audience group engagement. Maybe these critiques are right from an outsider's perspective, but bringing them forth on the internet is ultimately ironic since it implicitly does what it aims to criticize. More importantly, it has little power in subverting and changing how people interact. That's essentially it. That's the video. But there's a couple footnotes, full transparency. This essay is not very faithful to Benjamin. Sorry that it's a bit misleading, but it was a necessary jumping off point for me to work through social media and Deleuzean ideas. In particular, this video is much about Deleuze and Guattari's idea of the subjugated group versus the subject group. And this could be obvious from some of the language I used, like the gregarious attributes, gradients and thresholds. I really tried to be faithful to Deleuze by not just copy and pasting his ideas, but instead working through them. I think he has a lot to offer here because it's very, very common that any critical thinking about the internet slips into this language of authenticity. Assuming that there's some fake component inherent to the internet, where you're acting fake on the internet and your offline personality is somehow the real one. To be honest, it's a bit silly to assume, because anything that's a relationship is socially real. There are just in different manners. There's different functions. There are more ways as well that this real versus fake distinction appear and are propagated, but there's no need to list them. I think it suffices to say that they don't quite have the same mileage as they used to. The fake sociality of social media is beginning to instruct the real sociality of people's lives as much as people's lives have influenced what has happened on social media. So instead of this reflexive defense mechanism of calling it fake, I think we need to work through the wiring of how things happen and the conditions of social media that cause certain things to happen and how it's causing the changes in social life as it is. Secondly, I don't really go into examples very much, but there are a few I just want to say a little bit more on to just kind of plant in your head. For one, the music appreciator of the internet has always puzzled me. But music fans, it started to make a bit more sense when you think about it in terms of group participation. So much of music discussion is a delineation of the types of people that listen to this or that artist. People talk as if certain personality types are inherent to people that listen to an artist. Listening to music and making your taste public becomes a way of making a self-portrait as out of a collage of various group participations. Another example is the influencer economy. This is a general term that refers to anyone who makes some kind of living off of just posting about their life, opinions, what goes on, vacations. The influencer essentially inhabits the motif. How they become successful is in the engineering of a social atmosphere that gets unraveled in particular images, videos, and so on. Since the influencer is on this actor-audience feedback circuit, there's no real or fake in this engineering. They just unconsciously inhabit what resonates with people, which doesn't even have to be positive or desirable. This equally applies to political contrarians, for example. Strictly speaking, any kind of audience engagement is positive. Lastly is marketing and consumerism. The aim of marketing has always been to embed the idea or function of a brand into social fabric. I think the recent tendency of brands to take an outward position on social issues is revealing of this. It is essentially an attempt to inject their brand as a structuring motif of a group who is on the same side as the brand wants to be. This is also seen all the time when a brand or product gets matched with a personality type. Additionally, the starter pack meme is very much about this. All of these cases involve a brand that works as the motif of a certain social group. I don't have time to really go into all of these, but I just kind of wanted to put them in your head to kind of hopefully cement this. I'm sorry if it didn't make any sense. I tried my best. So.